It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Eli Ringe. We're here in your beautiful apartment in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And Eli, you were, and you still are, partly the head of the Jewish community in Antwerp, and your late father was before you.
Yeah, so let's try to resume more or less. My father came as a little boy, originally from Poland, through Holland, and then they came about in 1920 to Antwerp. He married my mother, who was originally from Vienna. Her name was Papmine, quite a famous family, well-known family. And they were happily married, and they had two children, two girls, Rachel and Hannah. And then in 1940, the war broke out, and my mother gave birth in June 1940 to my late brother. So in a nutshell, my grandparents from my father's side we lived together in Antwerp, and end of 1942, they were deported. This means they left Krakow at about 1912, 1913. The Germans came to Antwerp, took them back to Auschwitz, it was near Krakow, and this is unfortunately their end. We had South American papers through a cousin of my mother who was a Sternbuch, and they provided a lot of Jews and us with South American Paraguayan papers, and this was our luck. Unfortunately, it didn't help for my grandparents in Antwerp, and in February 1943, my father was deported with other Jews from Antwerp, not in Konzentrationslager, but let's say in a Schutzlager. This means as they had South American papers, the Germans wanted to protect them. So he was taken with the Dayan of Antwerp, the son of the late chief rabbi of Antwerp, Rav Rottenberg, with his brother, who was my wife's uncle. His wife was a sister of my father-in-law, and with a few other Yidden, they were taken to several camps in Germany. My mother remained on her own with 3 children. I was only born a couple of months later, and we were most probably the only not hidden Jews in Antwerp, thanks to the papers, South American papers she had. Of course, as everybody who survived the war, she had Nissim, Onashir, for instance, the head of the Gestapo. I don't remember his name. She had to go to him, and he asked her, how much did you pay for those papers? The Germans knew most probably that those papers' nationality was fake, but okay. Then she asked him, so why don't you take us with everybody? We've got time. Your turn will come. As I told you before, most of the men who had South American papers were taken to camps, but the women and the children remained in Antwerp till end 43, beginning of 44. Then the old chief rabbi of Antwerp, Rav Rottenberg, with his daughters-in-laws and with the grandchildren, were sent to Vittel in France. There, all the Jews from those countries were sent to. My mother remained, let's say, kimat all alone in Antwerp, because her friends were sent there, and they had it very good there in the beginning. So they insisted, they wrote letters to my mother, why do you stay in Antwerp? You have 4 small children. Come and join us in Vittel. It's good, you won't be alone. But in the meantime, my father, who was in a camp, he heard that the Germans start deporting Jews from Vittel. And through a letter he could send to my mother, who went through the censura, how do you say censura?
The censor.
Yeah, Bürger Muslim, with hints he gave to understand that it's dangerous for her. Please don't go to Vitel. She got this letter. We still had this letter where you see the seal of the camp, etc. And thanks to this, okay, it was of course a sign from the Weinstein. She didn't go to Vitel, and that's how she survived the war with us. My father was later, at the end of the war, before the end of the war, there was an exchange between the Allies and the Germans. He was sent to the UNRWA, UN UNRWA, where the Palestinians are today. He was sent to Algiers. And there he remained till about half a year after the war. He couldn't come back. He didn't have paper, nothing. It was very difficult for him to come back and to join the family back in Antwerp. By the liberation, there were quite a lot of soldiers, Jewish soldiers, Americans mostly, Canadians and some British, who came with the Allies to Antwerp. Antwerp was a very important town because it has a very big harbor. And the Allies wanted to have Antwerp in their hands. So one of the first cities in Belgium who were liberated was indeed Antwerp. They came there. There was amongst them a certain soldier, an American. His name was David Stein, and he was about 25, 26. And he told my mother, when he heard there's still some Jews in Antwerp, for him to be with Jews was something outstanding, that during 2.5 years, the only thing he ate was bread with sardines. So the Messias Nefesh of a young guy, he was in all the battles, he was in Normandy, and not to eat something not kosher is Moldavik. So anyhow, he and others found out there was still a Jewish family in Antwerp. So for Shabbos or whatever, he came. So my mother hardly had enough food to give because after the war there was the rationnement, how do you say? Rationing. So it was very difficult. But okay, if somebody wanted to have an Avira of Shabbat or whatever, came to my mother. And this David Stein is quite interesting that he wrote every day, he wrote a letter to his parents in America about what's happening during the war. In Yiddish. Most of the letters were written in Yiddish. And his daughter, who lives now here in Yerushalayim, has all the letters. We still have some of the letters, and she wants to give out a book just to tell the story of a young Jewish soldier with his experience, whatever he had during the war, especially after the war. And here, if you want, I'll show you later some pictures we have with him together. So David Stein and other soldiers came to us on a regular basis to hear some Zmirot on Shabbat and to have a little bit an atmosphere of a Jewish home. So my mother had a very difficult time. She was quite ill. She had problems with her kidneys, and during the war, of course, you couldn't go to a doctor. Let's give you an example. When I was born, there was no doctor, because although we had South American papers, there was only one doctor in Antwerp who could go to Jews. And from 6 o'clock in the evening till, 8 o'clock in the morning, nobody could go out in the street. So after I was born, the doctor came, because, okay, this was the situation. So money, of course, it was a problem. She didn't have too much, but still, how she did it, I don't know. With her courage and with her willpower, she succeeded to bring up children. Okay, I was quite small then, but let's say my two sisters, who are much older than me, that they knew all the other ways, they know how to daven, they know all the zmirot, to give them a proper education, and in the same time to have an open house for everybody who had to come there.
Eli, can I just
Yeah,
mention, there's a
please.
story that your sisters mentioned that there was a bomb blast and all the glass and they came into the room and you were standing in the bed.
This was, let's say, as my mother.
Like a miracle.
Yeah, it's a miracle. There were a lot of miracles. As my mother couldn't feed me properly, there was hardly no food, so I was quite weak. Until the age of 2 or something like this, I couldn't stand on I was rachitic, how do you say this?
It was very
Fragile bones. Okay, anyhow.
shaky.
So it was already finished and we didn't have windows. So everything was in wood because of the bombs there were no windows anymore. But after the war, my mother said, let's try to live now in normal circumstances, and she made the effort to put new glasses, new windows from glass.
During the war, could you
No,
go?
no, sorry, the end of the war.
But during the
when
war-
Antwerp was liberated.
But during the war, could you go outside the apartment?
Partly. My mother was very courageous. She, for instance, and it's very funny, not too far from us, outside the town, there was a hospital. And there were some Jews there. Why were the Jews there? The Germans were very much afraid of sickness, disease, who are contagious. And those Jews had contagious disease. They didn't want to send them away to the camps because they were frightened that they will catch, so they left them there in this hospital. And my mother, she was a big tzedekah, almost every day she made a big pot of soup, kosher soup. She went there to distribute for those people who didn't want to eat non-kosher, so in order to bring them some soup. So anyhow, I was born, and so after the liberation, my mother decided, let's try to make them normal windows, the house should be normal. And I was in my little cot on the first floor, and the Germans, as they wanted to harm the Allies, they started bombing Antwerp, the V1 and the V2. Those were the first rockets who existed. It was the V1 that you could hear when they were arriving. The V2 were already much faster. And the street next to us was the center of a gas power. So one of the bombs fell on this plant, and there was a huge explosion. And of course, all the windows and from our houses, of course, broke. So as I was lying in my bed just next under the window, my mother and my sister were sure, wow, nothing will be left for me because I was lying there. And then indeed, when they run up and they saw me, it was for the first time that I was standing there, so nothing happened to me. I wasn't injured or touched by one of those pieces of glass. Okay, this amongst so many miracles is only a small miracle. So let's go back to, let's say, to the story of my mother. She invited on a regular basis whoever had problems. She, for instance, as there were a lot of very sick people, older people, there was a guy, his name was Rabbi Avrom, an old Yid with a big beard. Maybe I could show you a picture out of it, maybe I still have it. And he had full with eczema, not only eczema, more than rashes, really terrible on his body. And nobody wanted, there was no hospital where to go. So she took in this Rabbi Avrom by us, and twice a day she was helping him, she was cleaning all his wounds. She took in everybody who she could help.
It's incredible.
Indeed, incredible. So, I'll give you another example, and we met the guy just a few weeks ago. You remember Yumi? There was a family who lived in Antwerp, and they foresaw that the situation that the Germans will catch them. They had a baby who was more or less my age. And before they ran away, they gave it to Goy, to non-Jews, to keep him. They gave him money and said, listen, here's a few clothing for him, here you have money to buy him food normally, and I think they gave him a kind of a teddy bear or something like this. When they came back after the war, it was about a year later, he was so thin, the non-Jews hardly gave him food, and they tried to nourish him, and he couldn't take the food. Whatever went in went straight out. So the mother, to go doctor was then, there was no doctor, mission impossible. So my mother took him, this boy was more or less my age. During months she kept him at our place. She pushed him, she forced him slowly, that his stomach should resist and he should be able to eat again. So it was a couple of months ago, we were in a restaurant in Antwerp and he was there. He lives now in Israel already many years. So we were together with our kids and grandchildren. So he came over to us and said, listen, that's a story. So Baruch Hashem, he lives here in Israel, he is a good health, he's not the biggest guy, but okay.
And your mother saved him.
My mother in a certain way saved him, yes, absolutely, because those people didn't know how, there was no help, there was nothing. Let's say there were a few ladies there. You know what their parnosa was? They were making tachichem. You know what tachichem is? If you bury somebody,
a shroud, like a
as
shroud.
there were so many people who died away after the war because they were so fragile, so ladies who didn't have parnosa, the community gave them some money, they should make this. It was quite a difficult situation. So, coming back, a lot of people came to my mother's house. My father was still in Algiers as a prisoner there in a certain way. So some people came by us, they asked where could we eat, and somebody said, you go by Mrs. Ringe. Some people thought we were a restaurant. It was not a restaurant. Okay, anyhow. So when my father came after 2.5 years, he came back from Algiers, he found a full house. There was not only, of course, me, he never saw me. I was already 2.5 years old when he saw me for the first time, of course, and the house was full with whomever needed some help. But what is not to believe that I only told you a little part what my mother did during the war and after the war. But when my father came back, the diamond industry started to start again in Antwerp. So most of the people who came back started to make panos and even to make money. My father took as a holy job to start to retry, together with others, to rebuild the Jewish community and the Jewish school. There was one big Orthodox school, Yesodei Torah Bet Yaakov, and he put together with some 2 other peoples all the efforts to restart, to rebuild the school. Let's say a few weeks after the liberation, my oldest sister Rachel, who you know, was the first pupil in the school. My mother and my aunt, they were the first teachers, okay, they were also teachers also, and that's how slowly they rebuilt in a certain way, thanks to them, thanks to other ones, they rebuilt the school. The same of the community, everything was broken, no shul, there was nothing. There were only refugees, new refugees, old refugees, people came from Poland, some came from Hungary. So really you had to restart from scratch. And during years, my mother, one side for the ladies, she restarted to make activities in the Agudat Israel. She used to give shiurim for ladies. My father was quite active. Besides his parnos, he had to work as a diamond dealer. He was quite active to rebuild, as I said before, the Jewish community. Until his passing away, he was always very active. He was vice president of the Consistoire Central Israélite. That's the main representative from the Jews by the authorities. And I already the last 40 years I'm also there. And okay, he made quite a huge job. For me it was already much easier to follow his footsteps, of course. This is in a nutshell, let's say, what was during the war, how Yid like my mother and my father and other Yid also could have the courage and the will to try to restart everything. So let's understand, my father was the only son. His parents were taken to Auschwitz. My mother, her parents, they fled from Vienna. They went to Latvia, to Riga, because he had a very famous Machutten, Mordechai Dubin. Mordechai Dubin was the head of the Jewish community in Riga, and he thought that he would tell my grandparents with the siblings to come there, that he would be able to protect them. But unfortunately, the Germans came there in the beginning of the war, took them to the woods and shot them there. So nothing. So from my...
Do you know if they were possibly in Rumbala? That's in the forest in Riga.
I think it was in this forest. I don't know which forest. But I know they were in Riga, they were taken out. This Mordechai Dubin, as he was a political leader, not only by the Yidden, but the non-Jews also, he was taken as a prisoner to the Soviet Union. He had only one son who was my uncle, and he survived the war. But after the war, he was completely broken. The Russians wanted to break the opposition, so they took him on a steady basis to psychiatric clinics to give them all kinds of medicines to break them, really, to break their power, their will. And what we heard, the Lubavitcher tried to take him out of Soviet Union, because he was a man who helped to took out the old Lubavitcher Rebbe from Siberia. He was a very strong personality, and thanks to his contacts, the old Lubavitcher was released from the Gulag before the war. So the Lubavitcher went even till the American president. They tried to put all the koiches, but they saw him as a danger, because he was a minister even in Letland when they were independent. And the Soviet Union, after the war, they took over Letland. So he passed away without very, let's say, lonely, without anything, in about 1955, 1956 about. This was quite tragic. My grandfather, who was one of the leaders of the Orthodox community in Vienna, he was representative by the Conférence d'Evian. I don't know if you heard about the Conférence d'Evian.
In Evian.
In Evian, where all the countries came together to see which country would be ready to take some German refugees. Nobody wanted to take them in.
I think the Dominican Republic said there was one.
But there was one that's about old. He was their representatives. He came back to Evian, so he had to clean the streets of Evian with a toothbrush. This is what they made for the Jews. And as I told you before, he left together with his wife, with my grandmother, with all the siblings. They left to Riga, where they were shot by the Nazis. This is a nutshell, very short story about the war, And if you have some questions...
Eddie, I just want to mention, I think when your mother went to see the Gestapo, she had to wear the yellow star.
Most probably, yes. They knew she was a Jew, and his name was Holmes, now I remember. He had outside the city, in a big villa, there was the head of the Gestapo. And he was there, and everybody was trembling of him. And my mother, as she spoke fluent German, and she was blondish, and she had a lot of chutzpah in her, she, let's say, she knew how to speak with such kind of people. But I know at the end of her life, when she was already quite sick, she had nightmares about him. Nightmares. She never told us too much about those conversations, if I can call this conversation. But of course, later on, you could see how deeply it affected her, those interrogations, of course, by the head of the Gestapo.
Can I make just a comment? After the war, many Jews that weren't actually from Antwerp came to Antwerp, and they re-established their lives and the Yiddishkeit. And the community was very accepting. They found a very welcoming place in Antwerp, which is very unique because there weren't many places where survivors could come and they would be accepted and they would restart their lives. So a lot maybe is because of your parents did the groundwork.
Maybe they have partly in source in them, but you said it very nicely. After the war, when the diamond industry started again, everybody from all over the world, every Jew was welcome to Antwerp. And nobody said, no, you are not from here. Panos is first by us. Everybody was welcome. Everybody gave him the opportunity to learn the business or the trade or to be a workman. And this was indeed something unique in Antwerp. And it has to be mentioned that Antwerp was an open city, welcoming city, for all over whoever came, let it be from Hungary, from Poland, from whatever. It's very important this should be said, yes.
And I think even to today, the community is a very, very tight-knit, but a very welcoming and a very special kehillah.
It's very welcoming. Now, lately it became much more Hasidish, much more Hasidish, but okay. The Orthodox, let's say when I was younger, the Orthodox community was maybe 20-30%. The day of today, we are the majority, Baruch Hashem. The Orthodox community became very strong.
Eddie, do you have pictures of your grandparents? Or
I have here, yes. Maybe you could have a look here. Please, this was me when I was a baby, I still had curly hair, as you see. This was the time when my father came back after the war. This was my grandfather who came from Krakow, was deported to Auschwitz. His wife, my grandmother. This was my great-grandfather. This is Rav Wolf Pappenheim. He was one of the leaders of Vienna, my great-grandfather. And this is my grandfather when he was young. Now we are going to skip a little bit. This is a picture of my parents just after the wedding, when nobody knew what kind of catastrophe will come on the world Jewry. My oldest sister Rachel was a hidden child partly during the war, with my second sister Hannah was also hidden, a year difference between them. This is quite an interesting picture. This is indeed straight after the war. We are sitting in front of our house. You can see my two sisters, my mother, my late brother. And you see in the middle, that's the famous David Stein, the soldier I told you before. He was here with the uniform. This was him. This is when I told you before that my mother went every day to bring some food for the Yidden in the hospitals. This was my carriage. I'm here as a baby with my two sisters and my brother. This was the famous pram, let's say. Okay, this is nothing to do with when I was a soldier in Belgium, but we're talking already many, many years later. We can see here, those are the passports where you see with the famous J, Deutsches Reich, for my parents when they went to Riga.
And
this is the Imre Emes, the old Gerrer Rebbe when he came to Vienna for the Knesset Gedoyle. You see him here. This here is a very famous story in Vienna of the Agudat Israel, where my great-grandfather is here, and my grandfather also, the one
your
of
grandfather
the
was in the picture.
Here. But this is my grandfather here, and this is my great-grandfather. You have here quite important people here. This is Ramey Shapira, I think, the Lubliner Hof. Yeah, Friedman of Chorkov, I think it's. Yeah, this is the Rebbe. This is quite. Let me have this. I told you before about Ramordche Dubin. This was Ramordche Dubin, the head of Riga, of the Jewish community. That's him. And this was my aunt and his son after the wedding. They were shot, they were taken away.
And here's a letter from the Chofetz Chaim.
There's a letter, yeah. This is a letter of the Chofetz Chaim who is asking Ramordche Dubin, as I heard that you succeeded of helping releasing the old Lubavitcher Rebbe, so there's a very Choshev Yid, and this was Rav, he was Rav in London after the war. This is, one second, and he was the head of the Slobodki Yeshiva, Rav Chaskel Abramsky. Here you have this picture of Rav Chaskel Abramsky. So the Chofetz Chaim is writing a letter to Rav Mordechai Dubin. Please try to help to release. He should be released. That's the Rav Chaskel Abramsky when he was young. These were two uncles of mine who were deported, who were about 15, 16 years old. They were deported. And these were two of my aunts who were also deported.
There's a letter from Latvia.
Yeah, this is a letter to my father from Latvia, where they write, for everything is good by us for the moment, and it was even by a wedding of one of my aunts. She still got married here in Latvia. And this is Ramordche Dubin here.
And you can see there's even the Nazi censor marking.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And here you have another one here. This is a letter that this is one of the first letters that my mother wrote to my father. This is first before the war. This is the family Sternbuch who provided my parents with South American papers.
That was the Paraguay.
Here you can see here.
Paraguay.
This is here to confirm that my mother and my father were Paraguayan citizens.
And this piece of paper, in a way, saved your family.
Absolutely. You have the proof out of it. Yeah, this is the famous paper, the savings paper, the paper who saved them. And here you see a very interesting, this is to confirm that my mother, and here you have my late brother, my two sisters, myself as a baby, that we are citizens of Paraguay.
It's incredible.
My parents even had the schus to make Aliyah, but they never could do it. They got a letter.
They got a. This was. This was a.
This was in 44 that they can make Aliyah. You see here?
It was a certificate from the British that
from the Jewish agency. No, this is the Jewish agency.
This went under mandate Palestine.
Yes, of course. This is a permit for Aliyah, and this is my father. I told you he was in several camps. He was on the other ones in Laufen, somewhere in Germany. It is the Red Cross. Officially, the Red Cross was allowed to come to visit them, but we know very well that the Red Cross didn't do too much. This is a letter where the Grand Rabbi, Chief Rabbi, says what my mother did during the war. And these were letters. My father, when he was in Algiers, he wanted to make a kosher kitchen for Pesach. And he had big troubles to succeed. The authorities didn't allow him. So he wrote many letters all over the world to try to ask, why can't you should give us the freedom to make a kosher kitchen, especially for Pesach also. This is a very interesting letter that David Stein wrote to my father in Philippines, Algeria, where he's telling how the situation is by us at home. It's a tremendous letter. It's really, you see, as a young Jewish soldier.
In 45, and look, he's Hebrew.
Yeah.
His Hebrew was...
Yeah, it was in Hebrew. He had a very good Hebrew and a very good Yiddish. It's really a letter that is remarkable for such a guy, and he tells how the situation is in Antwerp, how my mother succeeded in keeping Yiddishkeit, and how the family is okay, more or less. It's a very, very interesting letter. Absolutely. And this was in the paper when my father passed away in very, very many years later. Is just a picture of him. As you see, he was the chief, one of the chiefs of the community here when the new Rav Kaisert, the famous Rav Kaisert, came to Antwerp. You see here my father amongst other ones. And then the rest, I don't think it will be from the war. This is still my two sisters during and straight after the war. And this is the picture more or less. You see us in this famous little pram here, how my mother was schlepping us because she wanted to bring soup.
Eddie, can I just make, how did they manage to do this picture during the war? It's not a simple thing to...
I don't know. Don't ask me. I don't know. It's a very good question. I have a lot of questions. I don't have an answer, but that's the situation. And now I think we have more recent picture. This is much less interesting.
So I would like to ask you as a big favor.
Yes. Please drink something. You didn't drink anything. You should be quiet. I also think so.
Eli, these pictures are incredible. They really are, and I think the whole story about your family is so unique, and that you were born during the war in Antwerp, one of the only families to not in hiding. They lived as Yidden, proud Yidden in Antwerp.
This was a schmeichel from the Rabbinischen Leule. A schmeichel, how do you say this in proper English?
A siman, it's a sign.
It's a sign from that there were still some Yidden who could help other people, and there was a little garin,
a little seed
in order to help later on that Antwerp should again develop and to have such a nice community. And Baruch Hashem, my sister, Hannah, she has a tremendous big family. Rachel is working day and night. She is makar of people.
Incredible.
Incredible. She has the schos to bring back, bring so neshomas, real neshomas back to the Yiddishkeit. Quite amazing. And Baruch Hashem, this is a present that our parents gave to us.
So if I could ask, Eli, what message do you give to your children and grandchildren and to the future generations?
How important every little ma'aseh, even whatever
Every
action,
deed.
everything a person does, maybe it might be something small, it can have huge results later on, good ones, and chas v'sholom, bad ones. It means my parents did whatever they could. They saved a lot of people. They helped that Antwerp should become again a Jewish center. They gave us to the children, let's say, this Mesiras Nefesh for Yiddishkeit, and we could transmit it. My two elder sisters, as I told you, after the war, they knew whatever every normal child in those ages knows. I went already to normal school to reopen a school after the war with a few children, and then later on it was the biggest school, Jewish school in Europe with about 1,000 children. So we can see that with koiches you put in a thing, the achievement can be great. Never say it's only a little thing. Every little thing has its importance in life, and we have to be grateful to people like my parents, like other people, who had those koiches after the war. After the war, it wasn't easy to have such thing, not to think only for them, to try to make a lot of money. They tried to help other people, and then you see the result.
It's so true. It's such a beautiful message. So, I just want to thank you, if I can. I can just really thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you. I'm so grateful. It's all really. You are an example.
I'm not an example.
That you can all strive to emulate. Really, you and your family are.
Thank you.
It's unique and unique. And you
I
should
agree
just
with
have.
you. I agree with you that my family is really unique. Peter, I am a little peon. How do you say peon?
Not at all.
A little nothing in the story, and whatever I try to do afterwards is only because I took 1/100th of what they did. I tried to do it on my way, and Baruch Hashem, and we have people like you who put in effort to that history should be forgotten.
Not only is it unique, but you're very modest, extremely modest.
Thank you.
And I am so grateful to you. And I just want to thank.
No.
Okay, but Eli, really, thank you so much. You should just have
L'chaim for all the children, for all the grandchildren, for all Klal Yisrael, only of Simchas, Be'ezer Hashem.
And you should only just have Mazel and Bracha. And I just want to mention your sister Rachel.
Yes.
She actually brought back somebody who was a priest, and he didn't know that he was Jewish.
Yes.
And she helped him reconnect to his Jewish.
There was now on they showed the movie, an interview of him.
I've met him and I took, but very special. But your whole family is. It's
my sisters, let's say my late brother, unfortunately he's not here anymore. He passed away very young. But he had the Mesiras Nefesh to do a lot for Klal Yisrael. He was a rabbi. He went over in the south of France. He opened the yeshiva there. He opened a seminar for girls. And still the day of today, you have a lot of Yiddishkeit in the south of France thanks to him. People remember when they hear that I am called Ringe, wow, you are the brother of...
Well, I'm so grateful, and you should just have Mazel Bracha and Admei Vesrim, and thank you so much. It's been the greatest honor and privilege.
It's my privilege. Thank you so much.